why it's necessary. And so I was led to call this the disciplined disciple. When I came to S&T, I could say the same thing that Elder Exodus has said many times before in regards to rebellion. But when I came to S&T, I was very much saturated in rebellion myself. Not that I knew that that's what it was or that it was intentional, but it was a thing where it masked itself in different ways. The spirit of offense was one that was very evident when it came to rebellion. I was offended by everything. I didn't like tone and demeanor and all of those things. Even, like I said, the slightest bit of what would be considered necessary correction for me was covered in offense, because that's just what it was. I dealt with rejection, I had dealt with unforgiveness, I dealt with pride, and all of those things masked themselves. And what it boiled down to was that it was all rebellion. And one thing that the Lord said, that I heard the Spirit say earlier, is that we are at a time where we're treating the Father like ungrateful children treat their parents. We're mirroring this generation instead of being an example for it. A lot of times I say, like, the youth now, they have a sense of entitlement. And we're in a microwave generation. So it's what I want, it's when I want it, it's how I want it, and if you tell me anything different, then you're wrong. I don't have to listen to you. I'm not going to listen to you. And I'll just find somebody else that's going to give me what it is that I want. When we are walking in a spiritual direction, and if we are to turn that around as spiritual children, when it comes to both Yah and our spiritual parents or anyone who are in leadership, there's a tendency to be the exact same way. If, the Bible tells us to let this mind be in you that's also in Christ. And then if we allow that to happen, then we don't have to worry about our desires being outside of what Christ wants for us. But so often we don't get to that point because we are saturated in what our flesh wants. And so when we don't get what our flesh wants, then we act like spoiled brats. We go in a completely different direction because it's not what we want. It's not what we want to hear. It's not who we want to hear it from. It's not the way I want you to say it. And so I'm going to go to my room and I'm going to throw a temper tantrum. And then I'm going to find somebody that's going to tell me exactly what I want to hear, no matter how much it hurts me. And that's the exact same way we do God. If you're giving me everything that I want, I'm going to show up on the Sabbath because I need a word. So I'm going to show up, I'm going to sit in the front, and I'm going to stare a hole through Apostle's chest, hoping that he feels it, so he calls me up and gives me a word. And then I'm going to get that word to fill me up for the rest of the week. And you may or may not see me for another week or two because I'm full now. And so I don't need to come back until my cistern is empty. And then I'm going to come back and I'm going to burn that hole in Apostle's chest again, hoping to get that word. And when we are getting those words, when we are getting those nuggets, those pebbles, those gifts, those moments of edification, everything is good. We're like a child. I'm going to clean my room. I'm going to do my homework. I'm going to go to bed on time. Everything's going to be good. The moment that word that you're giving me is correction, I don't want it. It doesn't, it's not what I want. And then now I'm undisciplined all over again. What do I do with that? When these things happen, we tend to look outside of the assembly. We tend to look outside of leadership. We tend to look outside of even our spiritual parents for edification because we need something. We know we need something. We just don't want it from where it's coming from because we don't like how it feels. If we, Proverbs 25 and 28, a person without self-control is like a city with broken down walls. There's no security. There's no covering. There's no coverage. Everything is running rampant. It's running wild. It's wide open. Anything is coming in and out. 28. Proverbs 25, 28. Everything is running in and out. So there's no security, and there's no way to determine what's good and what's bad because everything is coming in and out. There's no filter. So it's because of this that we end up undisciplined. But how can you be a disciple if you're not disciplined? And discipline goes two ways. Discipline in the form of correction, discipline in the form of self-control. Can you discipline yourself enough to be still enough to do what is required of you as a disciple before you go out? If you can't sit still and obtain and retain correction, how can you be trusted by the Father to be released to go out and bring someone else in? You're not going to be able to go out and operate in discipleship if you're not disciplined, if you haven't gone through the correction, if you have not the self-control, if you can't control your tongue, if you can't control your anger, if you can't control the matters of your heart, how can you go out and be a disciple to draw someone else in? You're going to make spiritual orphans, like Apostle has said. If every time you are disciplined or corrected, you take that and you spew your rebellion, your offense, your anger in the direction of those that you're supposed to minister to, how is that going to draw anyone in? What does that say for your discipleship? You can't say that I don't need to be in the building because the church is in me. But that's, what church are you ministering from? What church are you drawing disciples to? You're not. You are creating, again, spiritual orphans. That's why we can sit on social media and see people all the time and say, that's why I don't go to church. That's exactly what's wrong with the church. That's why can't nobody stand in church now. Because somebody who was in the building walked out the door and created a spiritual orphan, who then created a spiritual orphan, who then created a spiritual orphan. It's like a flesh-eating virus. Every single time you regurgitate the hurt that you have instead of dealing with it. you're regurgitating things that somebody else is eating, and it's filth, ultimately. Exactly. If I have an issue with Exodus, I'm not going to talk to Sister Liz. Because my alt is not with Sister Liz. But if I go to Sister Liz, all that's doing is that's creating an issue for her, or a way for her to look at Elder Exodus and go, she may not be right. And how is she going to now be a disciple to draw anybody in? Not to Spirit and Truth, but to the church, the body, not the building. And that's what people don't understand. So often, if you are having a conversation, or you may walk in feeling a way one day. And I remember Elder Exodus said, when we were at the other building, when I first started coming, that I looked at her a certain type of way, and she was going to approach me. And it probably would have been a bad idea, but she was going to. And asked me if I had an issue. I probably didn't, but after she asked me, I probably would have. And then her whole witness could have very well been tainted with me, because I already did not want to be where I was at. And she would have made it worse. A disciplined disciple. If we go to Proverbs 12:1, and I stayed heavily in Proverbs simply because there are so many instances where discipline is mentioned in Proverbs. Proverbs 12:1 says, "To learn you must love discipline. It's stupid to hate correction." I tell my 19-year-old that all the time. He's away at college. He hasn't matured to the point where I would have liked him to be before he left and went to Detroit to go to school, because I coddled him. I covered him because that was my son. He was 6'4", with a scowl on his face, but the gentlest child ever. But I felt like I needed to cover him and protect him. And I coddled him instead of disciplining him in a lot of things. And I ultimately handicapped him in the ways of life. And that's what happens even spiritually. If our spiritual parents aren't going to correct us for fear of losing membership or offering, they are handicapping us spiritually. They are making it impossible for us to be disciples. You cannot go out there and say that you're ministering if you cannot be corrected or know how to correct in love. We are given instruction when it comes to righteous judgment. But we first have to be in a place where we can judge righteously. And we can't get there if we ourselves haven't been corrected and worked on ourselves. It goes full circle. We have to be willing to hear what the Spirit is saying. We have to be willing to accept what the Spirit is saying, regardless of who it's coming from. If you test the fruit and it's not poisonous fruit, there's a law, something that I learned in my criminal justice class in regards to fruit from the poisonous tree. And it is basically saying that any evidence that's collected during an illegal search or an illegal interrogation or anything like that, it can't be used against the suspect. It's the same thing. It should be the same thing. there should be fruit from the poisonous tree. We should be able to go out and witness or be disciples and not have to have a label on our chest because of someone else who was spiritually hurt and went out and planted poisonous fruit. My fruit isn't the same as that fruit. But because somebody who was hurt, who couldn't take correction, who didn't want to be disciplined, went out masked as a disciple, now we have additional work to do. So how do we do it? Proverbs 13:1. A wise child accepts a parent's discipline. A mocker refuses to listen to correction. If we drop down to 10, pride leads to conflict. Those who take advice are wise. A wise child accepts a parent's discipline. This includes our spiritual parents. There are times when the things that our spiritual parents say are not going to make us feel all warm and fuzzy. There are times when Apostle will call me and I hold my breath momentarily because I'm like, what did I do? Who said I did it? And when was it? Right, you get that thought in the back of your head, like you got to go through your whole week, like who I talk to? Did I go anywhere?
You're on the third ring right now.
Right, like I did pay for the grapes when I went to. Yeah,
it's about 3% of every phone call.
But when your desire is to be a disciplined disciple, you want to make sure that you can go forward with clean hands and a pure heart. So you brace yourself, you prepare for the worst, but you hope for the best. Because if I have to accept correction, I'm going to do so humbly because my desire is to first please God. And anyone who has a desire to be in relationship with the Father should have that same desire to be disciplined by a leader, by the Father, or in themselves. Proverbs 13:13, people who despise advice are asking for trouble. Those who respect a command will succeed. The instruction of the wise is like a life-giving fountain. Those who accept it avoid the snares of death. That in and of itself says everything that we need to know. When we are receiving correction, when we're receiving instruction, when we're receiving discipline, it's to snatch us out of the snares of death. It's just like when you see your child going to touch a hot stove. You are correcting your child as many times as it takes unless you're like Exodus, who is just going to let the baby go at some point because she's sick of repeating herself. But it gets to be that point sometimes, even with the Father. If our heart is so affixed on a thing, if our heart is so made up on a thing, if it's a job, if it's a house, if it's a car, if it's a spouse, and we are so affixed on that thing, and we can say 1,000,000 times, Lord, your will be done, but I'm praying really hard that your will is that right there. You have made that thing an idol, and he's going to turn you over to it. And then when you come back and go, okay, I see what you were saying. Can you deliver me out of this? Where's the discipline? No, now you have to walk through that thing because that's where your discipline is going to come from. That's where your divine discipline comes from, because then you learn to trust him, his way, and his correction. And then you yourself become self-disciplined. You learn to release the things that you hold so dear, and you go to God for what is necessary. And that's even in our everyday lives, in our basic things. We want so bad to love on people and to love people and to, for people to love us and see us as a source of love. But if we're forsaking the things of the Father for those things, we're not disciplined. We have to create those boundaries. We have to draw that line in the sand. It's necessary. If those things are drawing you further out into the world than is drawing them into Christ, there's a problem. You really have to assess what you're looking at when you're dealing with those things. Are you disciplined? Or are you showing them compromise? So often we'll say, well, I want them to see me as love. See, I want to be an example of the church. But are you? Because Christ is not going to compromise. And he's told us not to compromise. And that's self-discipline. Can you say no and be okay with saying no? Can you say not this time and be okay with saying not this time? Can you say one thing that Pastor said, and it didn't click until I thought about it, in regards to being part of a ministry that is a Sabbath-keeping ministry. I've spoken to people who know when the Sabbath is. They just choose not to observe it in that way because it interferes with other things. Everybody plans everything on Saturdays, so we just gonna stick to going to church on Sunday. And if that's what you're led to do, if you feel like that's what Christ is leading you to do, that's between you and him. But if it's for selfish reasons, you're not disciplined. You're not disciplined. You can't compromise the gospel and be a disciple at the same time. Discipline and disciple have the exact same root word, and it's pupil. To be a pupil, to be a student, you have to be disciplined. To be a disciple, you have to be a student. It all goes full circle. And if you're not going to release the things that you feel are your security and your security blanket, again, your discipline is tainted. And it's going to take a lot. Proverbs 13 and 18, if you ignore criticism, you will end in poverty and disgrace. If you accept correction, you will be honored. 13, 18. 13 and 20 says, walk with the wise and become wise. Associate with fools and get in trouble. Again, be disciplined and become wise. Be undisciplined and get in trouble. It's not a hard concept for us to understand. Those who spare the rod of discipline hate their children. Those who love their children care enough to discipline them. That's our spiritual parents. Like, to have leaders who are willing to constantly go under the gun for us because of one, our own mess, and then for two, because of their own convictions, You don't know what that, I don't know what that, I was part of 2 other ministries before I came here. And the first one I was there till I was 19. And I learned foundation. Then from 19 to 35, right before I had Leia, I was in the apostolic ministry where I learned foundations of the apostolic. And then I came to S&T. But none of it prepared me to be a disciple. I got what was necessary to be to have a heart for Christ, but not to be a disciple. I can't say that I was secure walking out and drawing someone in, because I always ask the Father, what else? What's next? I know there's more. And it doesn't mean that there was anything wrong with those ministries. It just means that there was something more that it was required for me to get. And it had to be through apostle and pastor. But had they not had the conviction that they have as leaders and as spiritual parents, we'd all be walking around here zombies, looking ridiculous, saying anything because we feel like we can. Anybody can read a book and repeat what they read. There's a preacher that knows the Bible, the King James Version, from the front to the back, word for word. He don't have to open the book. You throw a scripture at him, he can tell you exactly what it is, word for word. That doesn't mean anything if he's not walking in it. Anybody can do that. That's what people sit in jail and do all day long. They sit in jail and get every form of relationship and religion, and then come out and decide to be heathens all over again with no discipline. They had structure when they were in jail because they had to. They had discipline there, but then they came out. Could they come out and be disciples? No, because they had no self-control, no self-discipline. And that's what is necessary. We, again, are at a time where if people are not coddling to our feelings, to our desires, to our understanding of how things should be, then, they're just not who they say they are. But you will know them by their fruit. There are so often that, you'll have conversations, and again, people will regurgitate things, and they'll say things, and at one point, you may have gotten to the point where you're like, girl, cuz. But in your self-discipline, in your discipline, you learn how to refer people back to the Word.
That's right.
Go right back to the Word. Because that is what makes a disciple. I'm not going to join you, but I will pray with you. I will pray for you, and I will do what's necessary from me to draw you back in. And then I'll still look at what is in me that may needs to be corrected to be a divine disciple. Proverbs 15:5. I just want to show you guys that it is this scripture or passage of scripture shows up multiple times. Only a fool despises a false discipline. Whoever learns from correction is wise. 15:10. Whoever abandons the right path will be severely disciplined. Whoever hates correction will die. That's not just a physical death, that's a spiritual death. Again, the Father will turn you over to the things that you feel are so important. If you desire to not be disciplined, if you are so hard-headed that you just have to have those things that you just have to have, you'll be turned over to those things. It's probably a very long list of people that you know that walked away from the church, from the body, because they weren't hearing what they wanted to hear. They weren't getting what they wanted to get. They weren't getting their way. They couldn't take the structure. They couldn't take the order. They couldn't take being corrected. And because they couldn't take it, they walked off to find something else. And you see them struggling in confusion, in frustration, in devastation, because there was no discipline there. And they're not, if you run into those people and you have conversations with those people, you will hear that they're not disciples, because they're not, nothing that they're saying is going to draw you in. Nothing that they're saying is going to draw anybody else in, because they're probably going to talk about their discomfort. They're creating spiritual orphans and masking it as relationship. And it happens more often than we think. But just be mindful of the fact that discipline and correction. Think about when it comes to your door. Think about you as a parent, and when it comes to you disciplining your children. Why are you doing it? Why do you discipline your children? Out of love. You want them to avoid some of the hurt, some of the heartache that you've dealt with. You want your children to have a better life than you had. You want them to avoid some of the speed bumps that you had to deal with. It's the same thing with correction from your spiritual parents. It's the same way with correction from the Father. It's because of love. It's because there's a heart there to draw you in. They're loving you to life. They're snatching you out of the snares of death. And if you don't want it, if you don't like it, then you have to reevaluate yourself. Go back to self-discipline. What is in me that is despising the discipline and the correction so much? What is in me that is causing me to reject what is being said? Because even though I didn't like to hear it, I had to reflect and go, okay, I get it. I didn't want to get it because nothing about me is rebellious at all. But once it was, and it was my sandpaper that pointed it out. My husband, which made it even worse. You ain't gonna tell me I'm rebellious. You don't get to say that to me because you're my husband and that's it. You don't get to tell me that I'm rebellious. And then I had to pray about it because he said it and it was true. And it hurt me to my heart that he was right. Not that I was rebellious, it hurt me that he was right. But it's in those instances that we have to examine ourselves. We have to take the discipline to become self-disciplined and examine ourselves so that we can become better disciples. That's the only way that we're going to draw people into the body and actually build on what Christ has given us to do as part of our assignment while we're here.
Leave it run. We probably got people who,
You're jealous.